Good evening. Proposals for the UK's post-Brexit immigration system were unveiled today by the government, which said it was fulfilling its commitment to the public and taking back control of the country's borders. The Home Secretary, Priti Patel, published proposals for a visa system based on points to replace free movement for EU citizens. This is how it's going to work. Under the new rules, which come into force next January, people who want to come here to work have to reach 70 points. There are 3 essential requirements. The applicant must be able to speak English. That's worth 10 points. He or she must have a job offer, which is worth another 20 points. And that job needs to be what's called an appropriate skill level. If it is, you get another 20 points. If the salary is above £25,600, that's worth a further 20 points, making the crucial total of 70 points. But if the job pays less, you can still get points for other things such as qualifications. People who are already here or who come to Britain before next January aren't affected by the new scheme. Here's our chief political correspondent, Vicky Young.
Who should be allowed into the UK and what jobs should they do? It was a contentious part of our membership of the EU, but from next year, British ministers will decide. This building site in Essex employs people from across the world. In future, it'll be more difficult for lower skilled migrants to come here unless officials decide there's a shortage in a particular sector. And who qualifies as a skilled worker? Here, a plasterer or a carpenter would, but a labourer wouldn't. And the boss of this firm says it'll make it harder to build the homes people want.
We've never met the housing target, and we're certainly not going to meet it now. And previously it was an open door policy to a certain degree. We still found it difficult to meet the needs of the housing market. So it's just going to get worse and worse, and our business won't grow like it could grow.
What the ministers are saying today is that companies like yours have relied too heavily on cheap labour from the EU, and that's got to change.
I don't know where that concept comes from, that it's all about cheap labour. It's not. It's about a skill shortage. It's about jobs which the British people do not want to do. That's the bottom line.
But ministers say companies need a different approach.
Our business has a fantastic opportunity to work with this new government to level up across the United Kingdom, invest in people, to use innovation, technology, invest in skills across all sectors, and I mean every single sector.
The government's plans have been met with dire warnings from many businesses, those in construction, hospitality and the care sector. But ministers believe they're responding to what many voters really want: control over UK borders with the flexibility to attract those that the economy really needs. In Basildon, some think there will be local people willing to replace migrant workers. There are some industries saying we need people like labourers on building sites and we won't be able to get them.
Well, I mean, I know they want to focus on sort of more skilled jobs and that's fine. I think there's a big opportunity for anyone in this country who's looking for work to take up the kind of jobs that you've mentioned as well.
I mean, you look at the roadworks that's going on. There's a lot going on in this area, but how many of them are English workers? Not many.
And why do you think that is?
Because they take a lot lower wage.
Opposition parties say the new plans are unrealistic.
The government's error is to assume that just because your job is relatively low paid, it's not important and it's not of value. And there are going to be difficulty, particularly with people wanting to fill entry-level positions.
It'll be bad for workers and migrant workers as well, and it'll be absolutely awful for Scotland because, of course, we face particular demographic and economic challenges, and this policy is wholly unfit for their needs.
For years, the Conservatives have promised to reduce immigration. We'll soon know whether they've achieved that and what impact it's had on the economy. Vicky Young, BBC News, Essex.
Well, the new visa system is focused on attracting more workers deemed to be high-skilled by the government, while limiting the flow of those seeking lower-skilled or lower-paid jobs. But that's provoked a mixed response from business, as Simon Jack reports.
Hi, ladies. How are you doing?
The hospitality industry relies on extending a warm welcome to customers from all over the world. It is also the part of the economy most reliant on foreign workers, many of them low paid.
I've got the pina colada and a gin daisy.
Yaroslav, or Jerry, is a Czech-born bar manager at the Oldie Bell Hotel in Retford, Nottinghamshire.
I feel sad about it. I would like to know who actually described the job as a low skill, because I've got 5-year college in the hospitality. I get loads of experiences throughout my career. I was serving meal to the President of the Czech Republic, which that's not very low skill job. And as a cheap labour, I don't think there is such a thing as a cheap labour.
Of the staff that work in hospitality, 20% were born outside the UK, 13% of them from the EU. Manufacturing, which includes food processing, has 14% foreign-born workers, 11% from the EU, while health and social care relies for 10% of its workforce on foreign-born workers, split evenly between the EU and non-EU. Social care may face particular challenges, as although the work is often skilled, it is very often low paid. There are currently 122,000 vacancies in the sector, and there are fears that a shortage of workers will mean a shortage of care.
Care homes are either going to have to reduce the number of clients that they take in, and if that's not economically effective, then you'll see more care homes closing down.
There is perhaps no other issue where hopes and fears around Brexit clash with more resonance than immigration. The government hopes that by weaning businesses off an inexhaustible supply of low-skilled labour, that will mean more investment, higher wages and a more productive economy. Businesses fear that with such a short time frame, existing skill shortages will become even more acute. Concerns that unfettered immigration has led to great demands on public services are arguably offset that delivery of those services is very dependent on immigrant labour. However, the government is removing the limit on the number of high-skilled workers who can work in the UK. Good news for some sectors.
What we like is removing the cap on global talent so that we can access the talent we need from around the world to drive the tech sector, which is growing 6 times faster than the rest of the economy, Simon.
Hello ladies, you okay there?
Most of us want a high-wage, high-skill economy, but committing to getting there in 11 months' time is taking a very ambitious economic plunge. Simon Jack, BBC News.
Well, our home editor Mark Easton joins me now. Mark, what's driving this? Is it the economy or is it politics?
Oh, I think it's a bit of both. The political message is clear. The days of being able to use foreign labour to fill those lower skilled jobs, the government's saying, is over. But it's also saying, I think it's hedging its bets a bit here. And it is worried that the tough rhetoric might bump into the hard reality of serious problems we've been hearing in care, in construction, hospitality, the creative industries. Now, from January the 1st, they have agreed to expand the use of what are called temporary worker visas for EU citizens. They won't be able to take full-time jobs, but they're able to come for 1, maybe even 2 years to do work experience or training. And the government's already saying, that it intends to, and I quote, refine the system in the light of experience and will consider adding further flexibility, so possibly making it easier for lower paid or less well-qualified migrants to come if required. And with a country close to full employment and vacancies rising as businesses seek to expand, I think the Chancellor will be keeping a close eye on, to what extent cutting immigration is having an impact on the overall economy. So, yeah, the political message is clear, but I think there are also nods and winks in today's proposals.
OK, Mark, many thanks.
Good evening. During nearly 4 decades in the European Union, many service industries and businesses here have benefited from lower paid European workers. But today we got the details of how that is going to change with the extension to people from the EU of a points-based immigration system. It's due to come into force at the start of next year. The government, acting on the results of the Brexit vote and the last election, is aiming to cut the number of low-skilled migrants. The Home Secretary, Priti Patel, said it was time for businesses to start training up British workers. But those businesses say it's not as simple as that.
British carrots grown in Yorkshire, but should they be picked and processed by British workers? That seems to be the message from the government today as they proposed closing the door on non-skilled migrants. The man who runs this farm fears he could go out of business.
It's very, very serious. If we lose 70% of our workforce, we just simply cannot carry on doing what we're doing. We will either have to pay a lot more money for our workforce, in which case the price of food will go up, or we'll have to eat more imported produce.
That's as maybe was the message from the Home Secretary, who chose to visit a university science centre to emphasise that the more skilled would still be welcome. Her view, those who struggle to recruit should try harder.
There are 8.45 million British people in the United Kingdom that are economically inactive across the country in different parts of the country.
So the message is get on your bike.
Well, the message is we will be working with businesses and employers to invest in people.
But for all that, she wouldn't say if there'd be fewer immigrants overall in future.
Numbers could go up under this system.
Well, I'm not going to put in targets which become arbitrary and irrelevant around numbers.
One reason, under the new system for skilled workers, they'll need 70 points for a visa, but will only have to be educated to A-level rather than degree standards. They'll have to earn £25,600 a year for 20 points, a lower figure than originally envisaged, with some, such as nurses or those with a PhD, able to come in on even lower salaries. Having a job offer from an approved employer at the required skill level, together with good spoken English, takes them to the 70 points needed. But some sectors, such as construction, still fear there'll be big labour shortages, and the CBI are urging a rethink of the plans.
I think if we have a turning off of any access to that lower paid end of the job market, care workers, labourers on construction sites, hospitality workers, waitresses, kitchen workers, food processors, we will potentially see some businesses unable to expand and grow.
Arguably, it was David Cameron's pledge to get immigration down to the tens of thousands that was a driving force behind Brexit. Surprisingly, perhaps then, Boris Johnson hasn't set a target. What his new policy will do is make it harder to recruit from the European Union, easier to recruit from the rest of the world. And what that will mean in terms of numbers is still far from clear. Libby Wiener, News at 10 at the Home Office.
Well, to find out what effect the new immigration rules might have in practice, we have been to the North Yorkshire seaside town of Scarborough, where more than 6 out of 10 people voted for Brexit. The local economy relies more than most on workers from EU countries.
Over the years, Europe's low-skilled workers headed steadily for the bright lights of the UK. They searched for jobs industriously. But with today's new regime, the government intends to do the choosing.
Where's the second one?
In future, Greek-Romanian Karina wouldn't get this job.
For me, it's like discrimination. But there are good people that they want to come with their families here in UK for the better future of their children, like me, yeah, to improve their skills, which is a good possibility here in UK because you gave us the possibility.
Without the government's long-promised reform of social care, the boss of this home believes today's new regime, new misery for those looking after the elderly.
I regard care staff as highly skilled, but they're low paid. We've got to increase the pay. What does that mean? We've got to charge more, which means the public got to pay more for care. Then we wouldn't have such a recruitment crisis, but the government's not funding social care properly. Then it's stopping the supply of workers.
We've got 27 bedrooms in this hotel, and we're taking it back to the Victorian era.
During the summer, a third of Joe's workers are European, and he feels the new system leaves no time to train their British replacements. Joe, you were in favour of Brexit in the first place, you're in favour of today's immigration system, but still, it worries you.
I'm in favour of Brexit, definitely. The country needs to take care of its people before anybody else. But what I'm not in favour of is the immigration system being put in as a big bang and just come in and we have to just follow.
But you think you could go out of business because of this?
There is a possibility because we need to keep our wages in place. That is the biggest expense we have at the moment.
Scarborough's unemployed will now fill the gaps as people like Marta go elsewhere.
There are not enough British people interested in these jobs. Otherwise, I think the bosses would prefer to employ them because they speak fluently the language.
Across the North and the Midlands, the so-called Red Wall, the government is already trying to deliver for its new voters. Many of them voted for Brexit, and many of them because of immigration. But today we have seen two very different sectors that will be hit hard. Boris Johnson's team has to hope that any short-term pain turns into extra pay in people's pockets in time for the next election. Allegra Stratton, News at 10, Scarborough.
So a pretty mixed reaction to the new immigration rules from employers and those EU workers already here. And our business editor, Joel Hills, is here. Joel, we're hearing from Allegra. I mean, you know, taking back control and immigration was fundamental to the whole Brexit sort of project and to Boris Johnson's government. The plan is supposed to do that, but for businesses, it's not that straightforward, it seems.
It's not, and it causes headaches, and there's fear, and there's anxiety, and the government, you're quite right, wanted a landslide victory on the promise to end free movement. The challenge is, how do you do that without damaging growth? I mean, the government's own analysis shows that the more it restricts the ability of EU citizens to work here, the more the economy will be hurt as a result. Now, the unions and the various groups you've seen representing businesses are absolutely crystal clear. They argue that we're close to full employment, and there are problems that might be seen for pubs and shops and farms and factories and hospitals and care homes. In extremis, they risk going out of business. The government just doesn't buy that analysis, Raggy, not publicly at least. It argues that companies have become too reliant on British labour, that there are plenty on cheap labour, immigrant labour, that there are plenty of British workers for low-skilled British jobs. In future, companies will simply have to pay them more, or alternatively, invest in automation. And anyway, they say this system that's been designed will adapt to cope with genuine shortages. Now, it's worth pointing out that it does depend how the system is enforced. The government's already made massive concessions on the salary threshold, on students will now be allowed to remain in the UK for up to 2 years after graduating. The cap on the number of highly skilled workers has also gone. The government's talking tough on immigration. But it may well be the system ends up being more liberal than it sounds.
OK, Joel, thank you very much indeed.